I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi, and welcome. It's late morning here in Israel, and, well, the Americans have done it again. I try to follow my own advice, and when I don't, I'm usually wrong. One advice that I often give as a devout follower of Murphy's Law and its corollaries is that optimists are never pleasantly surprised. And here I was, optimistic, and I'm not pleasantly surprised. I believed that the Americans would leave their built-up forces in the Middle East area, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the like, to deter an Iranian response and an escalation in the region, at least until Election Day, because the current administration and its intended heiress gain nothing and lose much by the outbreak of wider fighting in the Middle East, and an Iranian response to the elimination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh would certainly be a major escalation and could lead to full-scale warfare. But the Americans, decided that their ships have been spending too much time in these waters, and they announced the withdrawal of the aircraft carrier and its force, USS Theodore Roosevelt, as well as the guided missile destroyer Dananuyeh, an Arleigh Burke-class missile destroyer with massive firepower, actually with the missile capability firepower of cruisers, guided missile cruisers of the previous generation, explaining that they've been away from home for too long and it's time to bring them back. Now, first of all, that's nonsense. Hint, nuclear aircraft carriers don't run out of gas. They can stay out as long as they want. Guided missile destroyers can be resupplied with whatever they need in terms of fuel, food, and other requirements. The reason to bring them back has nothing to do with the time that they spent out here. The Austrian statesman von Metternich famously, to those who are familiar with him in the period, was awakened one night suddenly to be told that the Russian ambassador has dropped dead, and half asleep he shook his head and said, "I wonder what his motive would have been." So don't take things at face value. What's the motive? And in this case, the American motive is pretty clear, and as usual in misunderstanding this region, it will most likely have the exact opposite effect of what they want. The north of Israel is heating up. Yesterday, Hezbollah fired over 100 rockets into northern Israel. We've gotten, unfortunately, used to that and calling it routine. The Americans, as usual, have said they don't want to see an escalation. In other words, Israel shouldn't respond. Note, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, 100 rockets into northern Israel is not an escalation. That's acceptable. The utter destruction of Israeli villages like Metula, acceptable. The displacement of nearly 100,000 Israelis from their homes for nearly a year, acceptable. That's not escalation. That's just, the price of doing business. And as Hezbollah escalates, and we escalate as well for obvious reasons, they're firing more and more into areas that were not evacuated. In other words, the chances of killing civilians has gone up significantly. couple of days ago, a drone hit an apartment building in Nahariya. Rockets are falling into towns and villages where the population is still in residence. And it's only a matter of time. There have been some injuries. And it's clear that things are heating up. With the heating up, the Iranians are sending more and more equipment. We're interdicting more and more of that equipment, taking out targets in Syria in particular, because we'd rather get them on the way rather than after they arrive. There's a report that Houthis have been organized from Yemen and are now in Syria. In other words, they're not just firing missiles out of Yemen at Israel and drones. They also have fighters on the ground in Syria. This is all clear escalation, and the direction is pretty obvious. So why is America pulling its forces out? To signal Israel, as usual, if you go after these people, you're on your own. And we're not with you. They're not saying that, of course, but that's what they mean. We're not standing with you on this, and you have to accept 100, 150, 200, 300, the sky's the limit, rockets a day into your population areas. But please just don't escalate, because that might lead to a war as opposed to rockets falling on you, which is what? The problem with that American message is that it's not just being received by Israel. It's also being received by Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, by Khamenei and company in Iran, by the militias that are backed by Iran in Syria and Iraq, by the Houthis in Yemen, by Hamas in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, by Fatah, who's working with Hamas in Judea and Samaria, etc. In other words, Israel's enemies are being informed that they can now escalate freely because America will not support Israel if it responds in any way, shape, or form beyond a tit for tat. You fire a bunch of rockets into Israel. Israel can take out the launchers that you fired the rockets from, although it's a little bit late at that point, and maybe even a few that you're going to fire tomorrow. But please, Israel, don't go any further than that, because we're not with you. The likely result of this is a sharp escalation on the part of Hezbollah, a further hardening of position on the part of Hamas, and further efforts, and there have been quite a few recently, I'm talking about in the past week or so, to launch major terrorist attacks out of Judea and Samaria, not only against the communities there, but also against Tel Aviv and its environs, and other places in Israel. Just the other day, a van was stopped on Route 6. Route 6 is the main trans-Israel highway, passing minutes from Tel Aviv. And in that van, over a dozen terrorists with weapons, bombs, and the like. Every night, the IDF is operating, taking out terrorists in Jenin, in Shechem, and in other places. And according to the Shin Bet, and I believe them, every single one of those is stopping an imminent terrorist attack that's planned and well along in the operational phase. In other words, a day or so before it's being launched. Now, we know from hard-learned, bloody experience that stopping a terrorist attack at the tail end, in other words, just before it takes place, when the terrorists with the weapons or the bombs are already in the population center, is virtually impossible. The best you can do under those circumstances is perhaps mitigate the number of casualties, killed and wounded, if you intervene quickly once it begins. Or if you're lucky, as happened in Tel Aviv a little over a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the bomber pressed the wrong button and blew himself up before he got into the synagogue that he was trying to get into to blow himself up inside. So luck counts, but luck is not a strategy. The best way to stop all of this, and it doesn't matter whether it's suicide bombing or non-suicide bombing, terrorist attacks out of Judea and Samaria, or rocket launching, anti-tank missile launching, and the like out of Lebanon, is not either tit-for-tat response or precision micro interdiction. Well, we know they're going to fire rockets from this area tomorrow, so let's take out some launchers. So instead of firing 150, they'll only be able to fire 100. But rather, a much grander scale operation that's going to cause much more damage. If it can be done from the air and with artillery, so much the better. I don't believe that's the case. And that also means going in on the ground to one extent or another and doing the massive damage that needs to be done to Hezbollah, both in South Lebanon and beyond, in order to get them to back down at least, if not to totally defang them, which would be a major war in and of itself. The Iranians have been waiting for this moment since they declared their intention to retaliate against Israel for the elimination of Ismail Haniyeh. One of the reasons that they haven't responded, and it's only one, was the massive show of American force, 2 aircraft carrier task forces, one, the Roosevelt, is being withdrawn now, the other, the Abraham Lincoln, which is still on station, a nuclear submarine in the Red Sea, a marine amphibious force in the region. But little by little, drop by drop, with all sorts of mixed messages, America is pulling its forces back, which was to be expected. And the Iranians, who have a great deal of patience, have been waiting for this day. Now, are they going to launch an attack tomorrow? Probably not. They've got other issues. They've just started providing Putin with large numbers of missiles, ballistic missiles beyond the drones that they've been providing with all along. One of the reasons for it, clearly, is to test them, because as has been coming out, and some of us were aware of this early on, in the massive Iranian attack in April, many of their missiles failed along the way, never made it to the targets, not because they were intercepted, but simply because they were incapable of making it for all sorts of technical reasons of their own, which send them back to the drawing board. In other words, they're not in a position, or they haven't been, they may be at this point, in a position to try to launch another major strike until they fixed all the problems with the weapons that didn't work the last time. Bad enough to have them intercepted and have the strike be a total failure, but why have it a total failure because over half your missiles just were incapable of making it to the target? But once again, the Iranians have all the time in the world. They don't have to strike now. They don't have to strike next week. They have it on the books, and that's their plan. Last but not least, and the great American fear, if Israel goes after Hezbollah, it's going to lead to a regional war. And now by pulling out, they're saying, well, maybe not, because we're telling Israel not to do it. We're already in a regional war. And what they're afraid of is blowing up into something grand that will draw them into it as well. For those reasons, Israel is expected to take as many hits as are thrown at it without really doing anything about it. This is clearly a poor strategy, not only on the part of Israel, but on the part of the United States as well. First of all, it makes America look like a very poor and weak ally. First, by the way, not the first time in American history. America's other friends, clients, and allies around the world look at this and say, oh, when the chips are down, they go home. And at the same time, there will likely reach a point in the not too distant future where Israel's enemies will cross that line, whether on a grand scale, as they did on October 7th with Hamas, or on a gradual scale where eventually the line will be crossed and Israel will be forced to go in, not just retaliate, but go in and take them out. That is, as I said before, more likely if Israel's enemies believe that America will not back it in that move. So that's where we are today. Hopefully things will be better tomorrow. In the meantime, thanks for joining us. Stay engaged, stay safe, be well.
Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.